I am an alcoholic, and by 2002, I had lost everything else that I loved dearly, including my home, my family. I knew the one liquor store that opened up at 6 a.m., and I would come with change to get whatever I could get. So what happens next is I experience the necessary level of humiliation that I become willing to do to change.
Today's guest is David Lidz, co-founder and CEO of WaterBottle Co Op, a worker-owned cooperative revitalizing West Baltimore. By employing people in recovery and formerly incarcerated individuals to rehabilitate vacant homes, they've built a portfolio of 22 properties and raised $5 million in financing. David's work proves that when workers own the wealth they create, entire communities can thrive.
After I got out of rehab and started looking around for work, and then ultimately the idea itself expands to I need to find purpose and connection with my community. I need to be of service to my community.
Can you tell me how you moved from a traditional business model to worker ownership? Where did you find out about the idea of worker co-ops?
There were some themes that were just really beginning to take shape in my mind. One was the initial one, just the wrongness of all these beautiful houses in such bad shape. Two was this greatness to embracing the work of lifting those assets as a way to also help individuals lift themselves. There's just a good business model here. I really started thinking on that. How could we do better? And now I'm starting to study about to what kind of business model would best do that. And of course, that's when I bump right into cooperatives. And at that point, we started beginning discussions about how to convert into a worker co-op.
One of the things that was really interesting to me in terms of how you've gone about the financing for this is the kind of innovative and non-extractive financing model that you've come up with. So can you talk a little bit about how you chose that financing structure and kind of what the benefits were over some of the alternatives that you looked at?
I sure can, yes. So the first thing was
Is your brand polished on the outside but messy behind the scenes? The logo is clean, the colors pop, but the messaging is confusing and the content is all over the place. And the conversions, they flatline because of that. That's what Thread Strategy steps in. We help purpose-driven brands clarify their voice, unify their visuals, and build strategies that actually work online and in real life. At Threya, strategy isn't an afterthought, it's the entire framework. We're not here to just sound good, we're here to build bold, integrated brands that shift culture and scale impact. So if you're done winging it and you're ready to build with clarity, confidence, and consistency, head to threastrategy.com. That's THREI strategy.com and book your brand clarity session today. Because good visuals are cool, but strategy, that's what scales.
Welcome to the Purpose Profit Shift, where real stories about bold shifts illuminate how we can create a new economy. I'm your host, Rachel Bernier Green, social entrepreneur, activist, and founder of EJ Consortium, a finance and operations consulting firm designed to help purposeful businesses change the world. Today, we're joined by David Lidz, co-founder and CEO of WaterBottle Co Op, a worker-owned cooperative that's flipping the script on community development by employing people in recovery and formerly incarcerated individuals to rehabilitate vacant homes in West Baltimore. With 22 properties in their portfolio and $5 million raised in financing, David is proving that when workers own the wealth they create, entire communities can rise together. Now, unbeknownst to David, he's actually one of the reasons why we started this podcast. We So we met at a conference about a year ago, and I've had the chance since then to learn more about his business. And we've, talked about how we can work together. And he's participated this year in some strategic research we did, and shared some really great insights about how we as a company put ourselves out there and how we connect with future clients and the need for us to have more kind of direct social proof about our work when, references may not be available or responsive. And this isn't limited to us. I actually spoke with a Chicago-based real estate development firm, Dual Development, doing similarly transformative work in Chicago, and suggested that they connect with David because I was like, you know who you need to talk to. He's going to have so much information for you. Come to find out, David had already reached out to them and connected with them, and they're in touch. So now, not only do I love, David's work and his story, but I also really love his willingness to show up for other people in the movement and being willing to push the work forward, give us real feedback, and help us to all grow together. So, with all of that being said, David, thank you so much for joining me today. I know I held back on you being part of the reason for us starting the podcast, but as I was going through and thinking about what we talk about today, I was like, wait a minute. And it kind of fell in place for me. I'm like, I don't know that we would be doing this right now if it wasn't for you. So thank you for that and for being here today. I can't wait to talk more about your story.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you for having me. I was really excited to get the email saying that you were starting this podcast, Purpose Profit Shift, which sounds amazing. And I know you're an amazing and a brilliant person and very articulate. So I'm sure this podcast is going to do wonderful things. So I was just honored to be on the early list. The latest detail is, that's a little mind blowing. So thank you.
We're going to, we like to keep it very real and conversational here. And so let's start by talking a little bit about your journey and your background. So you at one point had a career in government relations in DC. And so can you tell me a little bit about kind of what changed the trajectory of your life from that government relations career to the work that you're doing now?
The catalyst, the thing that changed the trajectory was my drinking problem. I am an alcoholic, and I did have a career in government relations in the 1990s, which began when I graduated from the University of Maryland, and I was bartending in Annapolis. And so I was pouring drinks for legislators and lobbyists. And I graduated with this English degree, which if you graduate with an English degree, you really don't know what you're going to do. So I asked those politicos if they could help me find work, and they did. And for a while, I had a pretty cool career doing government relations stuff on a variety of policy matters. But I was a bartender for a reason, and that is I really liked drinking too much. And by 2002, I had lost all of that and everything else that I loved dearly, including my home, my family. By summer of 2002, I was doing the things low bottom alcoholics do, which is sleep in the woods and show up at the liquor stores when they first open at 6 a.m. I knew the one liquor store in Anne Arundel County that opened up at 6 a.m. and I would come with change to get whatever I could get. So what happens next is I experience the necessary level of humiliation that I become willing to do things to change, which started with going into rehab and really embracing what I was hearing in rehab. And one of the things that was loud and clear to me that is once I got out of rehab, I had to become connected to my community, which in this context means my sobriety community.
Hmm.
And then once I found some kind of footing there, I had to be of service to my community, which again, in the beginning just means things like back then it was cleaning ashtrays. They still smoked at AA meetings, and that was my first service job. Making coffee, setting up chairs, and then as you stay sober for longer, the service opportunities become a little more than that, and then ultimately the idea itself expands to mean that if I'm looking to live a life that is not only sober, free from the disease that I suffered from, but also just fulfilling and joyful, I need to find purpose and connection with my community. I need to be of service to my community.
Absolutely. And so thank you so much for your vulnerability and sharing that really kind of how you landed in the career in the first place and then how things kind of initially got off track. And as you were talking about how the first work that you needed to do was to be into community and be of service to others, how can you talk a little bit about how that became the foundation for everything that you've built since then?
This all like ties into all these social enterprise themes that are just like part of our DNA now that we had no idea any of this lexicon or principles back then. But it looks like this had that career, white collar career, had a degree, but after I got out of rehab and started looking around for work, I couldn't get any. Home Depot wouldn't hire me. because I guess because I was fresh out of rehab and also had a couple scuffles with the law enforcement.
Right.
So the check the box thing applied to me back then before I ever knew or was thinking much about that kind of stuff. And it just so happened I ended up in a sober house on the western border of Baltimore City, and I got a home group kind of in the heart of West Baltimore. And as I would make my way from that sober house into Baltimore, you pass through these amazing neighborhoods of just beautiful architecture, old Victorians and
Yeah.
old townhomes, but they were all crumbling. They were all vacant,
Mm-hmm.
crumbling, a lot of stuff going on those streets that you kind of wish wasn't going on. And I just kept scratching my head about that. And eventually I started poking around these places and I came across a crew that was cleaning one out. They had big contractor trash bags and they were loading up all this stuff and they were changing the locks and they were cutting the grass. And I asked them what they were up to, and they told me this was a business that they were in, that they were hired by banks and institutions like Freddie Mae and FHA to service foreclosures. And they also asked me if I wanted work, did not care about my background. If I was willing to go knee deep into rat poop and mold and fill trash bags, they would take me. And so that's it. I got involved with that, and what I had found was a low barrier to entry business opportunity because they hired me as a 1099 independent. I'm sure as a way at that time to avoid taxes and unemployment insurance obligations, but
That's about right.
um, what I ended up out of that is I legit became just a 1099 contractor and started right from that early moments forming my own business. And then to get to the answer of your question, as the business grew and I started to need help of my own, I just listened to what I was hearing in those recovery rooms, which is to help others, to give what had been given to me. So I just started hiring from the rooms of AA and NA and from folks coming back from rehab and from jail. Again, never heard the word social enterprise or employment social enterprise, was just trying to stay sober. And that's how it got this business, Appalachian Field Services, begins back in around 2003.
Yes, and I love that, because one of the things that I think when we talk to people and they say, am I a purpose-driven business? Am I the type of, company you want to work with? And I'm like, that's part of the work is to show people that it doesn't matter if you're immersed in this lexicon or have all the right words. It matters about the work you're trying to do, the impact that you're trying to make. And so, you didn't set out to, have inclusive hiring practices. It just became something that was innate to the work you were doing because of the experiences that you had and knowing that there were people out there seeking work that were willing to show up and do great work and simply were getting ridden off and not getting a chance, which is kind of a societal recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We really kind of just pull the rug right out from under people who are trying to restabilize, who are fighting addictions, and don't give them a lot of great choices. And so this work is critically important. And, when you first started Appalachian Field Services, you've said, you started off with just a cordless drill, you had a digital camera, a van, and a lawnmower. So, kind of what kept you going when you were in those early stages of recovery, just starting your business and growing it? Where did you think it was going at that point?
It was so hard, but it just all felt so good. First thing that felt good was being sober, after 22 years of not that. It just felt so good for my mind to be getting clearer and clearer every day and my physical health to be coming back. And, you also learn how to live honestly and in service. These are just things um, that really felt great. The work itself was like gritty and nasty, but also
Yeah.
kind of cool. Like, you know, we go to vacant houses and we get ourselves in, and and you get to explore, I don't know, all kinds of architecture and all kinds of stories. So there's this cruelty and this sadness that you're stepping into, but also it's just like really interesting, and it's a little dangerous. There's like an adventure element to all of this, but and then the part where it starts to grow. And I start hiring other folks in sobriety again, long before I know this is social enterprise, or I have that term in my mouth. You can feel that. You can feel like, oh, this is good. Like, we're everything you said. We're helping folks who need help in a really good kind of charity way. Like we're
Yes.
just providing gritty jobs, a good way to sweat it out and start over. And then ultimately, and I think maybe we'll dive in deeper to this later. There is like this kind of almost spiritual, soulful element holism to this that binds it all together, which is here we are, this ragtag gang, ne'er do wells, or at least not recently do wells, who are trying to build our lives back together, and we come into houses which were once beautiful places, and the houses are just as sick as we are, and we start cleaning the houses out and restoring them, and then ultimately maintaining them and renovating them in the same way that we are working on ourselves. And a human body, I think, is a vessel, a spiritual vessel. It's a physical manifestation that holds something more spiritual inside. And I think a house is the same thing. A house is a structure where all kinds of spiritual things happen. So, um, yeah, so that's, I forget what the question was, so I'll stop here.
No, that is perfect. And so, and actually is a great segue into the next question, because you've mentioned a few times how, you did not set out to become a social enterprise. This was just your way of doing business. So, can you tell me how you move from a traditional business model to worker ownership? Where did you find out about the idea of worker co-ops?
Early, within a couple of years of doing this work, there were some themes that were just really beginning to form, take shape in my mind and spirit. One was the initial one, just the wrongness of all these beautiful neighborhoods and beautiful houses in such bad shape. Two was this greatness to embracing the work of lifting those assets as a way to also help individuals lift themselves.
Right.
Um, and I could just feel like there's just a good business model here. Like everything that I'm looking at, these destroyed neighborhoods is a bad business model. Like that, these are assets that had value once and don't anymore. That something has gone terribly wrong with whatever business model
Right.
drove that, right? And so anyway, I really started thinking on that. How could we do better? And I really started studying the history of what happened to those neighborhoods, which of course we all are fairly familiar, particularly folks who are going to watch shows like yours, are with terms like redlining and predatory lending and blockbusting. I started deeply examining the history of all of that injustice and bad business. And at some point, it just became clear what could happen here is we could stop seeing these assets in these neighborhoods as blight and start seeing them as resource and opportunity. But the resource and opportunities for not, let's just say the oligarchs and capitalists and extractors and oppressors.
I mean, if there's ever a place to insert colorful language, I
Yeah,
feel like
yeah,
that's
yeah, right, right. You know, right. But for folks like us, who are people that were marginalized and in my case, for other reasons, but trying to put our lives back together and just trying to get a good day's pay and a good opportunity to build a new life. And probably more significantly, folks who were already in those neighborhoods and have lived through decades and decades and generation of extraction and oppression. We could rebuild these assets, these houses, and turn them back into healthy, affordable homes. We could create great jobs. We could clean up the environment. But the most important thing is when we do all that, we want to make sure all of that wealth that does get created stays in the neighborhood. And so now I'm starting to use terms like neighborhood equity and neighborhood equity models and impact real estate portfolios.
Love that.
And now I'm starting to change my studies a little bit about to what kind of business model would best do that. And of course, that's when I bump right into cooperatives. And I start reading those books and listening to those podcasts.
I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask for a book list now, but if you happen to have one, we'll
I do.
definitely, oh, please share. We would love to
Okay.
link it uh, to the podcast. This is something that, even though we're only a few episodes in, that's come up a few times when people are doing truly transformational work, that it always is deeply rooted in the context of why the situations they're trying to address exist. And so taking the time to get that historical context and ground ourselves there, but also to see from a historical perspective what business models and what solutions have historically been able to address, equality gaps when it comes to wealth and things of this nature, because we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, but because of the way history is taught in this country, there's a lot of missing information where people don't realize that economies have been at the, breaking point like ours is in many ways, and that there are solutions and business models that have come in and completely changed the game when it comes to wealth distribution, quality of life, and all of these measures. And people simply don't know that those things exist. So, when you were doing all of this research, what was the tipping point when that made you decide that Appalachian Field Services needed to be a worker co-op?
In the research phase, I can name like two really, yeah, there's like 4 books and a podcast. But one of the books I read was Anand Girahardis's book. Oh, I'm forgetting the name now. Crap. Winners Take All, which is sort of a critique of the Clinton social enterprise model. Anyway, it ends with his whole thesis is that over time, centralized redistribution, so tax and spend kind of policies to lift up the excluded, have been stripped down to nothing by oligarchs who have bought political power. And so his answer to that is to just take it back, to find a way to retax the oligarchs and then create government designed redistribution, which I'm not going to knock government programs. We certainly need those and are certainly, of course, freaking out now to the extent to which those are being stripped. But I was just so disappointed by that was your answer, because it just feels to me like there's a reason why the oligarchs did that is because they always do. Like we might win a moment in history where we
Right. It's nothing new.
right. Right, where we get to a moment like the New Deal moment, which was just a set of kind of a perfect storm of history that created conditions that allowed for great redistributive programs to be built. But then there was a calculated project for the next decades to get all that torn apart. And
Yeah.
we're like at the culmination of that effort now. So that's like an answer, but it's not a great one. And I started listening to some podcasts and learning about cooperatives. I read Dr. Nemhard's book, of course, Collective Courage, and realized the great history and the great tradition, particularly in communities of color, of using cooperative economics to do what you'd want to do to preserve a neighborhood. Oh, and right in the middle of all this, I'm also reading Color of Law, which is probably one of the first really definitive histories of redlining. There's been a few more that have come out since that have gone a little deeper. But anyway, and also you're reading about, so one of the greatest government redistribution programs that we think of, which is the 30-year FHA Fannie Mae mortgage, right? That has lifted the middle class and lifted out home ownership. You learn in year 2, is already cuts out communities of color, like literally with the red lines on the maps.
Yeah.
And so it's just another example of, you know, how all this can go sideways if you're just going to rely upon the government. And so this is all stirring around in my mind. I listened to a podcast which featured Kate Khatib, who is now the co-executive director of Seed Commons, which is a CDFI that lifts up worker cooperatives. Back then, only worker cooperatives. We'll get into this, I'm sure, in a minute. Now they do real estate too. They weren't so excited about it when I first bumped into them. But Kate is from Baltimore and started her own worker cooperative called Red Emma's Bookstore and Coffee. And I heard her on a podcast describing her cooperative journey and how cooperatives can really work in community and how they were Baltimore. And so I found my way to Kate and to Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy and to Seed Commons. And they ultimately, and at that point, we started beginning discussions about how to convert Appalachian Field Services, which is that little trash out company I started
Mhm.
15 years before that, into a worker co-op.
So that is an excellent segue because one of the things that was really interesting to me in terms of how you've gone about the financing for this is the kind of innovative and non-extractive financing model that you've come up with Seed Commons and the Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy. So can you talk a little bit about how you chose that financing structure and kind of what the benefits were over some of the alternatives that you looked at?
Well, by the time we began talks with Seed, we had already gone out and started doing this thing, which means we use a lending product called hard money loans
Right.
to go and buy our first 3 row homes in West Baltimore. And for those who don't know, hard money are also called private money or private. Back then, it was private individuals who had a few 6 figures, a few 7 figures stashed away, and they would loan to the streets at 15, 16, 17% rates plus points. It's really awful. And this is one of the ways, by the way, wealth just gets ripped out of distressed communities. Um, so we'd use the hard money loans and credit cards to kind of keep the social enterprise alive and to get these assets. And when we talked to Seed, they were really excited about convert AFS converting into a worker-owned co-op. They were less sure what to do about this housing thing that we were doing because it wasn't in their wheelhouse. It wasn't their gig. By the way, back then when I first went around the impact investment world, 2016, 17, and 18, it blew my mind how impact investment was not interested in residential housing back then. It's changed now. It's gotten much better. Nobody would talk to me. And the minute I said, if I said commercial real estate, they'd listen. If I said resident homes, housing, no, we don't do that. So Steve was shared that reluctance as many other impact investors. But by this point, we already had 3 houses. They were exposed to really extractive interest rates and harsh terms. And so it was not hard calculus for Steve to say, well, we have the wherewithal to refinance those mortgages and we would be moving into secured loans, which we've only done unsecured loans all these times. Maybe this isn't so bad. um, they offered a package of loans ranging from I think at that time from 5% to 8%, part of which was refinancing the first 3 properties we had. And the whole package was somewhere just shy of $500,000. It kind of sort of bought me out of the business. The business that I had built was not really profitable. So I got a $30,000 check, which I just had to put back into the business. There's also a story here. Like I've learned a lot about co-op development and how I might do it better the next time. But anyway, the point being, we now had refinanced about $500,000 worth of debt that was anywhere from 9.5% to 40% with the small business loans into 5 to 8% loans. And if you read Seed's loan notes, which are very short, very democratic, very easy to digest and understand, there are paragraphs in there committed where they express their commitment to non-extraction. So not only are there these really favorable terms, they also say things like, if you're not making a profit, on a given quarter, month, or you don't have to pay. We don't want you to go out of business trying to pay this back. And I go on and on about how beautiful these terms are, and maybe we'll dive in a little deeper, but that first $500,000 got refinanced over years into something more real estate-like and even better terms. So that's what that moment looked like anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you touched on both the changes and impact investment over time, but also how it takes, someone being willing to look at things differently and not just say, well, this is not what we do, so we're just not going to do that, for perpetuity. Um, because changes like that, going from, 40% interest rates to 8% interest rates, that's transformative for what your business can look like. And I know that the financing is one way where you've helped push things forward, but you also, because we kind of skipped over this, but you also had to do this in Maryland, testifying to lawmakers and things of that nature because they did not actually have a legal framework for worker co-ops. So can you talk about a little bit about how you found yourself involved in that process and kind of where things were when you started and where they've landed?
I didn't know what I didn't know and how messy this was first getting in.
I mean, would we jump if we knew all of that ahead of time?
Yeah, I know.
Probably for the best sometimes.
There are a ton I don't know if you call 'em mistakes or you just call it learning curve, but,
Learning, yeah.
yeah, I don't even know where to begin with that. It was so hard and we did so many things. So the first thing was, yes, Maryland didn't at the time have an LCA structure, a limited cooperative association structure, and it still doesn't. We passed the law last year, but it won't go into effect until next year. And so what that meant is in Maryland, you organize as LLC, or in our case, an LLC that owns a couple of subsidiary LLCs. And then it gets really kind of gnarly trying to fit your cooperative governance within LLC structures. It's definitely doable, and in some cases, it makes sense to do it that way, but there was a ton of struggling we did. I won't get too weedy about this, trying to make all of that work. And then there's, like, a whole bunch of other stuff that's, um, going on kind of in this subterranean of all this, like, I'm even afraid to talk about it still because we understand, and because of the way Maryland law is written, if a workman's comp insurance company sees you structured as a co-op, they won't insure you, and then we're out of business. But if you're structured as an LLC, it's okay, but you have to structure that just right, and then you end up paying tens of thousands of dollars of legal bills trying to hit that just right. And then it gets like even crazier because there's only one Maryland law firm that is an expert in cooperative structures. And we tried to work with them, but there's only one, so they were way backed up. So we end up working with Jason Weiner in Denver, which is great. Those folks, they're brilliant, right? They're the kind of right up there with the best of the best. But you have this situation where a Colorado law firm is trying to figure out how Maryland law it works. Yeah, so the more I was in it, the more I became aware of what a mess that was, and also just like the incongruity. That didn't make sense that Baltimore has this amazing co-op scene, but Maryland doesn't have a co-op law.
Right.
So when Seed and Bread started talking about going before the Maryland legislature and getting us our bill, I was said, "Oh, I know about the Maryland legislature. I used to work down there, so I'd be happy to be part of that." And we testified for a year. The bill gained a lot of steam, but ran out of time before the session closed, 2024. And then this year, we finished the job and we got that bill passed.
That's amazing. So how did it feel to be kind of in the legislative process from a completely different angle, and then to, even though it was not a quick journey, but to leave with a win that's going to be transformational for so many other cooperative owned businesses? Because I think, like, when you just talked about like what's at stake when the legal structures do not support the work that you're doing, a lot of legislators, a lot of business owners, they don't think about things like that, that it's
Yeah.
important for us to have the legal frameworks to operate within, and that sometimes we need to push to make that happen. But yeah, how did it feel walking away once the bill was finally passed?
Oh, that was great. Testifying was great. It was really fun. Winning, of course, is great. And then there's just this, it's also great. For the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 semesters, we've been signing up for the University of Baltimore Community Clinic. So, it's where the law students will give you pro bono help underneath their advisor. And so our project for this September is going to be analyzing the law that just passed and figuring out how we can shift our current structure into the new law, which is just like, why you might, if you're an alcoholic like me, be thankful for your alcoholism, because this is like work I could never have dreamed of, like finding my way through by the normal path. But I was just at the right spot at the right time to help testify and, be a part of getting that law passed. And now, like, we'll be the ones that the law students will be using to figure out the law and to learn and to create this cooperative legal scene in Maryland. It's just so beautiful. And as for returning to my old haunts, the political and policy and politics scene, also just, it almost is like makes me a little weepy, because when I was down there the first time, it was like, I don't know, all the wrong stuff, partying, power, sucking up, like I don't know how much anybody knows about what it looks like to be down in the lobbying scene or how legislation is really done. But there can be a noble side of it, and there can be kind of a seedy, gross side. I was on the seedy, gross side back in the 90s for the most part. And this was all just like organic and good and not about egos and power, but just about doing the right thing and forming relationships with elected officials and regulators,
Yeah.
just because we're all working together to try to get something done, not because, there's, I don't know, some other thing going on. And then to close the question, that kind of vibe has just also happened on a bunch of other fronts. So now I know the West Baltimore state senator pretty well, and he and I are conversing on a bunch of issues having to do with rebuilding West Baltimore, from how we do better alley cleanup and redesignation of kind of alleyway spaces, open spaces behind blocks of row homes, to how do we set up an immigrant community center in West Baltimore. So thank God for sleeping in the woods and then going to rehab.
We never know what is going to be the catalyst in changing our lives or putting us on the paths that we are. And I mean, the reality is that a lot of times those are very painful experiences. Um, I think that that is something that has come up, again and again in these conversations. And one of the things I just kind of absolutely love about you sharing this is how all of the experiences and things you went through, really equipped you in a lot of ways to successfully do the work that you are doing now. And through all of this, navigating the different financing pieces and the legislative pieces, forming these relationships. Now, Water Bottle Co-op is at a place where you guys manage 22 properties, that you employ 30 plus people, that you've, secured significantly more financing. So tell me, when did you realize this model is actually working financially and socially? Because we've talked about kind of this holistic, that it's not just a money game, it's not just a social game, that there is a spiritual aspect of it. When did you realize that this was really working?
Having it actually really work is a fairly recent phenomenon, just because, Seed Commons came in with a financial product that worked. I just kind of knew for a lot of years that it would work, that it was a no-brainer, because after 10 years or so of doing what's called euphemistically property preservation work, mortgage field service work, servicing foreclosures, I was really intimately familiar with what finance, investment or divestment looked like in communities of color. And it was just so easy to see that there's all this money just getting ripped out of these communities. If it wasn't ripped out of these communities, that would be a good business. And it was just like, such a no-brainer for me, that I had such a hard time articulating and getting people to believe in for so many years, but it just looks like this. You look at a crumbling, beautiful house and you say, oh, there's jobs there to fix up that house. And when it's fixed up, if you fix it up right, not slumlord it, not shitty
Yes.
flip, but if you fix it
Right.
up right, now you have a beautiful, fully renovated structure that can just
Thank you
do
for
all
calling that
kinds
out.
of things. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A plague of people calling themselves doing similar work and they're, yeah, doing the landlord specials, covering up things and putting people into places that they should not be living.
This is relevant to the question you asked. I have a slide that I did a couple of years ago, and the numbers need to be revised, but I'm sure the percentages, it showed normal form of investment happens in a oppressed neighborhood. All of the ways that money is just ripped out, that wealth is just ripped out of that neighborhood. So it goes like this. You see these signs go up, which are called bandit signs. We pay cash for housing. We pay cash for houses. And you get the postcards or the texts saying, we'll buy your house today. And then that is a character called a bird dog who has no money. And that bird dog will find somebody who has a deed, and they will get that person to sign a contract to sell the deed for, say, $5,000 or $10,000. And then the bird dog will be able to transfer that contract to a flipper for $20,000. So that, or for $30,000. So let's just say the bird dog got the contract for $10,000 and sells it to the flipper for $30,000. That means the property was really worth $30,000, and the owner of that deed just got ripped off
Right.
$20,000, and that just went right out of the neighborhood into the bird dog's pocket. And then to close the deal, the flipper is going to go get those hard money loans they're a little lower now, but I think they're back up around 12%, 15%, 17%, because that's the only financing the flipper can find. And there'll be 5 points and there'll be real estate commissions and title company commissions and all that. So the only way the bird dog is going to be able to make this all work. So the flipper is going to be able to make this all work. So at the end, they can get their 20% out is if they cut corners all the way through. So not a full renovation, not worrying about getting the lead out, not worrying about putting drywall over mold, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
Finding the lowest labor they can pay, which is,
Right.
oppressing labor. And also you're not going to get like the highest level of skills. So anyway, I got a slide that like stacks up all of these pieces that are extracted. And at the time, I think we would expect a property to finish for about $125,000 investment. And it was like $67,000 of that $125,000 were just stripped out of the community, and the community was left with an asset that, if it was thoroughly examined, is probably still worth less than that final sale. So anyway, to answer your question, when those numbers really start to form in your head and you see it every day, what it looks like, you're like, it's just not really that hard to think of. You could.
You're
You
like,
could
it's
just
so
change this.
terrible.
Yeah, yeah. You could just. There's so many places where you could come in and just change this transaction, these transactions in a little bit, and still be doing like way better. So I ran around a lot of years, and to this day, like it amazes me how hard a time I have getting people to see that. But thankfully, Seed Commons did, and because they came in with the instruments that they came in, it is doing all the things that you expressed. Although I do have to update the numbers. We are now up to 30 properties, and by
Amazing.
now Seed has come in at about $6.25 million. And now that we have site control and are in pre-deb in a lot of these properties, government grantors are kind of coming to us. Like, we've never gone out and got grants before, but because the fit is so clean, so I think we've raised like 250,000 in grants, which puts us up to about 6.5 in total raise. So
Congrats. To go from a place where you have this vision to now a place where people are actually coming to you saying, this is actually a win-win. They might not have seen the vision before. They might not have gotten it. And now that they see you at work, they say, this actually makes sense for our communities. It makes sense for our budget. It just makes sense on so many levels. And people weren't doing it before for a lot of reasons. But part of it is because they did not have the vision and the wherewithal to pursue or to persist through circumstances that a lot of people would have just kind of thrown their hands up and said, this is too hard. There's no path forward, that we just have
Yeah.
to keep doing things the way that they have always been done.
Yeah, there's the pervasiveness of that mindset. I mean, it creeps right deep into our own impact investment community, you know?
Yeah, that a lot of times people in the impact investment world, that they're transitioning from more traditional or extractive forms of investment, and that they're carrying forward a lot of the existing systems and just trying to retrofit them to a better purpose, but they're not necessarily, in a lot of cases, not all cases, radically rethinking how financing should look to support better business structures, which is in essence what Seed and Bread did with the financing structures that you all came up with.
Yeah.
So you've now spent all of this time advocating for worker co-op legislation, and also are starting to think about developing replication models. And so, what is you mentioned earlier the idea of the impact real estate portfolio? Can you tell us more about what your vision of the impact real estate portfolio is and what that could look like when you scale it nationally, for example?
Yeah, it's exactly what I described, like taking that deck, which I should have had ready, but I'll send it to you. That deck slide, the premise, which I think is a no-brainer, which is you have a crumbling but salvageable asset, a home, um, in a jurisdiction that is suffering from a housing shortage and is also being, in our case, and I'm pretty sure you have similar dynamics in Chicago, but in the case of Baltimore, is being encroached upon by extreme housing cost pressures in suburban areas. And in our case, it's the Maryland counties and Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is one of those cities like New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco where the real estate has just gone through the roof. Nobody can afford anything anymore. So you see that building and you don't see blight, you see opportunity.
Right.
And it's just not really that hard to model it out and see that it works. It does require a certain capital stack or a certain kind of sequencing of how the financing comes in. It is not at all hard to believe in. And at this point, we are proving it out. We've got our 30 properties. Even like the grants are just coming in, but haven't really started impacting our finances yet. So with Seed's latest iteration of their financing, which is a 3% 30-year line of credit. So there's just in that phrase I just mentioned, there's all kinds of beauty that makes this work. But it is a loan. We have to pay it back. So we have to create a portfolio that performs. With that, what we end up is a finished building that is usually upside down. So
Okay.
Seed may have loaned us somewhere around, $195,000 to get it done, and maybe it appraises worth 185. So Seed has a high tolerance for not really like worrying too much about that LTV or cost of value. And if you're willing to, if you can get that in, you're having faith that over time that the value of the property is going to pop up above the principal of the loan, and it will be fine. But the thing that does happen is even when we're presenting the assets as affordable rent, we are able to they perform, right? So they make enough rent that we can have a family in there that is renting for less than 30% of their gross income, and some of those incomes are less than national averages or some level on the AMI chart that's lower than 100% AMI, and we're still able to pay all the bills, pay Seed back, and still enjoy a little bit of profit. And this is what we're calling an impact real estate portfolio. And the idea is that it would be a cooperative structure that is at first kind of managed and developed by a worker element, but then has some kind of governance or charter that makes it clear that when the time is right, it will open up co-op membership or it will exit the workers in favor of the longer term stakeholders, which would be tenants and also the neighbors that have been in the community all along, whether that's just other homeowners, neighbors, or it's local churches or nonprofits or businesses. And then the impact real estate portfolio idea is that there are cities like Baltimore where these economics work well. You saw how we started this. It was, it wasn't pretty and it was kind of dumb and fumbling, but it turned out that we could do it. And we've learned enough now where we think we could help other energies and other cities start small like we did and slowly grow this. So there could be highly localized neighborhood equity portfolios popping up in Chicago or in Detroit or in Camden, New Jersey, or in Cumberland, Maryland, or in Wheeling, West Virginia, or in Meadville, Pennsylvania, with whom we have a great conversation right now. And they could become their own things, but then we could also federate all of these in a way that we could be combining learnings, combining tools, combining resources, and in particular, combining finances to just make this, scale and maybe change something in America.
And I love that two of the things that you mentioned, you didn't use the phrase patient capital, but you talked about how a lot of the deals are upside down at first, and not drastically, but how important having patient capital involved is, because when you kind of think of the catalytic nature of your work, and also real estate as a vehicle of investment over time, regardless of how we've had, real estate crashes or different things, that statistically that it will appreciate over time. And your model for what you're doing in the interim is just chef's kiss, because a lot of people wonder, okay, how do we piece these things together? And also that you shared that there is a bit of profit in this, because I do think that one thing that is important in this kind of purpose-driven space is that we don't shy away from profit. Extractive profit, exploitative profit is a problem, but profit in and of itself is necessary for the perpetuity of the work. And often we find people that just want, if you say the word profit, then they are, up in arms and say, well, then this is inherently wrong. So I appreciate that you brought both of those to the forefront, because I think those are conversations that we definitely need to continue to have.
I probably would also, at this point, maybe replace the word profit with patronage. So the idea is that profit is right now for the workers, but then ultimately is for the other stakeholders that we invite into the portfolio, the rightful owners of the portfolio.
For people who aren't familiar with the term patronage, can you explain that in the concept of a workers' co-op?
Yeah. So if a co-op earns a profit at the end of the year, the co-op needs to decide what to do with the profit. And the whole idea of a co-op is that you own your assets, you own your capital, and you benefit from the profits that the capital drives instead of the oligarchy benefiting from it. So there's a discussion on how to distribute those profits, and typically or often that's done in the form of what's called a patronage distribution, which is a dividend, right? So if you are part of a worker co-op that, earned $1 million profit, you and your coworkers will decide how to divide up that $1 million. And if you're a tenant-owned housing portfolio, you would do the same thing. But there's a cooperative economics element here that I'd really just, I don't know. I'm a poor articulator of this, but so unlike typical profits that are extracted from the community, end up on Wall Street and get commodified and leveraged and all that stuff, this profit stays in the community, and there's a thoughtful discussion about a tenant co-op is a great example. The tenant co-op members have to decide how to set their rents every year. And then they want to look at how much money are they going to take home. And they know that they're both paying rent. And then at the end of the year, they could take home a profit. And they also know they are part of a community where there are needs in the community. And there are some people that are struggling in one way and some people that are struggling in another way. And so there's this very localized, very constructive conversation about how to use profits in a way that lift people instead of in a way that just rips wealth out of a place.
the problem is not inherently the profit, it's the distribution of the profit.
Yeah.
And when we have models that are extractive and the profit is going to people who had nothing to do with the means of production
Yeah.
versus going to the people who are actually doing the work and the actual stakeholders, not the shareholders necessarily. They can be one and the same. But when I'm using shareholders in this sense, thinking of people who are far removed from the actual work and all they're doing is pulling, you know, all of the excess value from the work, that those are conversations that we need to have. That profit does not need to leave and, head elsewhere. And that there are so many business models and opportunities for people to redistribute profits in a different way. And also that profits can be reinvested in the business intentionally, but not because the business can't survive without the profits, but they can be reinvested strategically, that they can be set aside for reserves. Because if there's one thing that you learn running a business is that chaos will ensue at some point. And
Yes. Yes.
and
We didn't cover that chapter today, and we won't, but I have a lot of those stories too.
I think we'll have to have you back to discuss that, because I think no entrepreneur journey is complete until we have discussed some of the chaos. But uh, with that being said, as we kind of bring this full circle today, one of the things that you brought up a few times was just kind of how this has been such a holistic personal and community healing experience. So, as we're wrapping up, what do you want people to understand about the connection between business and personal healing and community healing?
Yeah, I already kind of described like my very personal experience with that. Here I was, a crumbled vessel with all kinds of wreckage on the inside, trying to rebuild all that. And I found this opportunity first to do that with other individuals trying to find their way like I was, and then with homes, so enjoying or experiencing that very real connection of rebuilding a home, which is also a spiritual vessel. And then that moved on up to communities, blocks, neighborhoods. And it can sound a little kitschy or a little overplayed sometime when when we start to use the addiction metaphors for societal ills. But man, but man, we feel like, I think we as a society feel like we're on the brink or at the point of wreckage and despair. Um,
Absolutely.
so this idea of rebuilding it and being of service to one another and recognizing that as not just like a thing to get out of the mess, but as a way, you know, for living a joyful, serene, purposeful life in the case
Yes.
of an individual and existence. I don't know, society and the level of society. Like, I think we could really examine and maybe overwork that metaphor for good, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's valid, and I love the fact that as you were describing that, that it's so it's the antithesis of what we normally hear when people talk about the life of an entrepreneur. I very rarely hear people talk about joy. And so, I'm very big in leaning into the kind of anti-hustle culture. We need to create a space where we can all thrive. And so just listening to you articulate that vision and what your hope for people doing this work is, I think it's just really beautiful and something that I wish we could take more time to discuss and hear from more people, because that's critically important that we just have to reshift the relationship between, you know, what work should look like.
It has been hard and dirty. Like,
Yes.
we haven't gone into many war stories that include rats and feces and fights but, sometimes when you sit down and you wonder, could things be different? What would I do if I could to make things different? Whenever I've asked that or just am in my own personal reflection, it's really weird to say. I am not proud of all the gross and hurtful things that happened during my drinking, but from getting the drinking got me to the moment that got me to the life I lead today, and in the context of this conversation, the work I do today, I am just enormously grateful. And, I'm in my backyard and you can probably see some pretty flowers and there's a little house over there, but it ain't much. Like I bought my own house. It was an old foreclosure, an old rundown farmhouse. It's small. It's like really small. I don't have, I'm not getting, enormously wealthy off of all this, but I have, enough. And, maybe that's maybe it's a good place to end it. This is maybe what the cooperative economy is. It's an economy of service and enough, right? Like
Yes.
service is joy and enough is peace.
Yes, that is the shift. So, David, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work?
Yeah. So WaterBottle Co op, www.waterbottle.coop is a great place. We have a really cool media team. Or just it's a couple of young people posting great stuff in their own voices about our journey. And on there are, links to get in touch with us. I'm on LinkedIn, type my name. I'm there. If you message me, you'll find me. Probably the easiest way. I have some email addresses too, but those are probably the easiest.
Awesome. Well, David, your journey from English major to bureaucrat to recovering addict to visionary entrepreneur, it proves that you don't have to choose between doing good and doing well, that you can scale responsibly, build wealth while closing wealth gaps, and create thriving businesses that uplift communities. And so, for those of you listening, if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe they don't know the lexicon, maybe they don't identify as a purpose driven entrepreneur, but they're keyed in on the impact they want to make. Subscribe to the Purpose Profit Shift wherever you get your podcast and join us next time as we continue exploring what's possible when business becomes a force for justice, sustainability, and profit. And remember, the future of business isn't just about what you build, it's about who you become in the process and who you bring along with you. Until next time, keep shifting.